The Free Synagogue of Flushing was established in 1917 and is the oldest Reformed synagogue in Queens and Long Island. So the synagogue has quite a lot of history. To put that in perspective, we've seen 2 pandemics, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the Great Recession. Flushing is also a neighborhood that has experienced something similar to what happened down on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The synagogue was founded by the Hebrew Women's Aid Society. The group provided comfort and aid to the small Jewish population living in Flushing at the time. Through their services, they saw a need to establish a religious school operating on liberal lines while focusing on making better Jews and better Americans. On October 31st, 1917, the Society sent out a letter asking recipients to attend a meeting to discuss the creation of a new school. It was estimated the cost would be around $500, or $10,000 today. By the end of the night, they raised $1,500. Pretty amazing. A lot of the donations came from wealthy Jewish merchants with businesses in Flushing. With their goal met and with the excess funds, it was suggested that the society establish a synagogue. And so, here we are today. Flushing is one of the oldest settlements in what is now New York City. It is also one of the original 3 colonial settlements comprising Queens. Flushing traces its roots to English settlers who received a patent in 1654 from Mr. Stuyvesant, governor of the Dutch colony. Early in the town's history, Flushing residents stood together in support of a local Quaker community to protest the religious intolerance of Governor Stuyvesant. They drafted a document called the Flushing Remonstrance. The document from 1657 remains as one of the earliest published defenses of freedom of religion in the United States. If you've been to Flushing, you'll notice the streets are named after various plants, but also 2 well-known horticulturists. During the 17th century, Flushing developed as a major center for horticulture. William Prince started Flushing's first nursery in 1737. Samuel Parson also had established a nursery in 1838. Parson's nursery also provided trees to the city's first public parks, among them including Central Park and Prospect Park. As in the rest of Queens, Flushing's fortunes evolved with the improvements in transportation. The introduction of regular train service to New York City in 1854 led to the post-Civil War boom in luxury home construction for wealthy New Yorkers. The extension of the trolley lines into Flushing from 1888 to 1899 and the electrification of the Long Island Railroad helped turn Flushing into a commuter suburb. From the 1890s until the outbreak of World War I, Flushing saw its estates divided up into new suburban developments. Perhaps the biggest impetus to the growth of Flushing and Queens in general was the opening in 1909 of the Queensboro Bridge that connected Queens and Midtown Manhattan. Also significant was the extension of the IRT into the borough during the 1910s. Flushing was touted as a place where the home life, the social life, and the religious life are at their best. Over the next 2 decades, the population of Queens mushroomed by 750%. The boom continued well into the 1920s. Although the city's Jewish population was enormous, the pre-World War I Jewish population of Queens was quite small. In 1913, New York City's Jewish population was estimated at around 1.3 million. Of that number, only 23,000 lived in Queens. Synagogues played a major role in the life of New York City's Jewish population. By 1918, New York's Jewish population was estimated at between 1 and 1.5 million and was served by 700 synagogues. In that year, West Queens had just 1 synagogue in 1 building, while East Queens had 18 synagogues, only 5 of which had their own buildings. Flushing's first synagogue was most likely the Temple Gates of Prayer, a conservative synagogue established in 1902. The Free Synagogue of Flushing was the neighborhood's second. Much of Jewish immigration was stopped with the passage of the Immigration Act of 1924. It wasn't until post-World War II that Flushing's Jewish population started to take off again, with returning Army GIs buying homes and starting families, but also those seeking a suburban lifestyle. The post-war boom was considered to be the synagogue's golden years, with membership at its peak. Especially once the aftermath of the Holocaust was revealed, synagogues saw participation among Jews jump from 20% to 60%. So, here's the million-dollar question. What does it mean to be free? The Free Synagogue of Flushing took its name from the Free Synagogue, founded by Rabbi Stephen Wise in Manhattan. It all started when in 1905, Rabbi Wise was approached to become the rabbi of Temple Emmanuel, perhaps New York City's wealthiest and most prominent Reform congregation. But he had run afoul of the congregation's leaders by giving a trial sermon on social justice and various progressive causes that directly challenged the thinking and doings of several prominent members. In the negotiations that followed, Wise insisted that if he took the pulpit, he would be free to speak his mind. The answer he received? The pulpit of Temple Emmanuel has always been and is subject to and under the control of the Board of Trustees. That meant that he could not accept the position, but he had already decided to create a new kind of synagogue, a free synagogue. In 1906, in an interview with the New York Tribune, Rabbi Wise laid out 3 core principles that are now a part of the Free Synagogue of Flushing's heritage. First, no assigned pews, a democratic arrangement which recognizes the equality of all worshippers and does not discriminate in favor of position or wealth. Second, no fixed dues. The synagogue is supported by voluntary contributions, members being expected to contribute in accordance with their means. And finally, a free pulpit. The occupant of the pulpit, regular or visiting, has the complete freedom of speech and assumes sole responsibility for their utterances. The congregation, on the other hand, having the right to accept or reject, in whole or in part, the message delivered. In a word, the synagogue, in its spirit and organization, is free, democratic, and liberal. Rabbi Wise intended to reach out to unaffiliated Jews. He envisioned the Free Synagogue as a place of moral instruction for Jews. His approach to the service included significant changes, such as the elimination of the Torah reading and the scheduling of Shabbat services on Sunday to supplement those traditionally held on Friday evening and Saturday morning. And that was because many workers didn't have the standard 2-day weekend until the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. But to Wise's mind, the most important aspect of the Free Synagogue would be its devotion to the cause of ethical teaching and social justice. Since 1917, the synagogue has always been a place of action. As you already know, one of the founding principles is freedom of the pulpit. This meant that we had many guest clergy from various religious backgrounds delivering sermons that addressed the needs of their community. And soon after, their needs became a focus of the Jewish community. Our pulpit has played host to many civil rights leaders, politicians, musicians, and many other personalities, savory and unsavory. Through social action, the synagogue has been a part of many historical events and moments that have shaped American society. From suffrage to war efforts, disease and famine, civil rights, worker rights, and gender equality. The synagogue has also hosted many outside organizations, providing them with space to pursue action. During the Great Depression, the synagogue was turned into a soup kitchen, and during World War II, the synagogue served as a casualty center for the Red Cross. And up until recently, we provided space for an abused women's group providing counseling. Most of their clientele were women from the Muslim faith. Eventually, they outgrew the space and moved on. Thanks to our new rabbi, Rabbi Gale, our synagogue is poised to become a sanctuary within a sanctuary, meaning that the Free Synagogue has become a sanctuary for counterculture. We are the antithesis of what we are seeing in today's society, which is bigotry, divisiveness, hatred, and prejudice. So that kind of gives you an idea of how far we've come as a congregation, but also where we're headed in the next 100 years. The experience made me rethink what sanctuary means today. The Free Synagogue of Flushing is comprised of two buildings. One is a pre-Civil War mansion, and the second a sanctuary built in the early 20th century. The Samuel Vernon Mann property is a 19th century mansion that the synagogue used for services in the early years and before moving into a new multi-purpose built sanctuary completed in 1927. In 1917, the congregation first met at the Odd Fellows Hall. Then, in 1921, the congregation acquired the Samuel Vernon Mann property. Their immediate plans called for the remodeling of the first floor of the homestead so that the building could be used as a place of worship. The Mann property is over 161 years old. It includes a large house, parts of which date back to 1859, but the building appeared to have been remodeled in the 1890s. Based on the evidence from historical maps, a frame house with a French-style roof and 2.5 stories tall was built on the site in 1859 for Flushing merchant Robert Carter. It was purchased in 1870 by Mary Hoffman, the wife of attorney and jurist Murray Hoffman. He's best known for the Hoffman Rule, which created a formula regarding property value and is still in use today. In 1891, the property passed on to Samuel Vernon Mann, husband to the daughter of the Onderdonk Cogswell family. Mann, a prominent currency broker, collected 18th century furniture. So it's probably at this time that the colonial revival style alterations to the house were made. In 1921, when Mann sold the house to the synagogue, the New York Times reported on the sale, describing the house as a 15-room house considered to be one of the best examples of Southern colonial architecture on Long Island. Today, the building houses our offices, our current religious school, and space for organizations providing community service. Between 1923 and 1930, Flushing's Jewish community quadrupled in size. It went from around 1,000 to over 4,000. By 1924, the newly acquired Mann Mansion was already too small for the growing congregation. In a letter from the congregation's president, Mr. Siemens explained the need for a new building. He said, "As a member of the congregation, you undoubtedly recognize that the last High Holy Day service, and since then, the need for larger quarters. In those services, there were 330 people, while our building only seats 120. Even on Friday evenings, often there have not been enough seats to accommodate our members. The Sunday school fills every nook and corner of the building to overflowing, not alone as to seats, but standing as well. So much so that our rabbi has announced that no more children may be registered, as they cannot be accommodated." The building committee requested that an architect by the name of Maurice Corlin prepare plans for the new facilities. The building would have a seating capacity of upwards of 650 in the sanctuary, and downstairs a social hall accommodating 400. The committee estimated that the cost of the new building would be approximately $165,000 to $175,000, around $2.6 million today. The total cost ended up being around $250,000. The Free Synagogue's sanctuary is an example of neoclassical revival style building. Its design is typical of early 20th century modern American synagogues, combining classical details with Jewish symbols. Above the main entrance to the colonnade, there's an English inscription from Isaiah, "For my house shall be a house of prayer for all people," a quotation particularly appropriate for the mission of the Free Synagogue. Inside the sanctuary is a large domed space without a separate gallery to serve as a women's section, reflecting the egalitarian theological position of the Reform movement. The leaded glass windows with Jewish themes add light to the space, while the crowning shallow dome that covers most of the space has a leaded glass skylight with a Jewish star in the center. Another feature of the synagogue includes a pipe organ, which became central to early Free Synagogue Sabbath services. The synagogue is one of only a few early surviving 20th century synagogues with a traditional pipe organ. Today, the sanctuary is still in use and hosts many Jewish life cycle rituals and celebrations. Up through the 1950s, Flushing still had a large Jewish presence. A long-serving rabbi said that when he had arrived at the synagogue, the membership included more than 500 families. Flushing had many Jewish-owned businesses, as well as delicatessens and kosher butchers, like the early days of the Lower East Side. In recent decades, however, while the Jewish population of Queens has grown enormously, the Jewish population of Flushing has declined significantly. As the population in Flushing evolved and the Jewish community changed, the Free Synagogue worked to adapt to the changing environment. The synagogue had to take a look at the cultural and social integration of American Jews, but also, what does a Jew look like today? Going on to 103 years, the Free Synagogue has been a bastion of liberal thought and social activism. The congregation continues to welcome all people, interfaith couples, straight, gay, every ethnicity and heritage, spanning the generations, with an elderly contingent as well as families with young children. Today, the synagogue remains a vibrant Reform congregation, drawing congregants from many parts of the borough. The synagogue reflects the history of Jews in Queens in the 20th century, especially the history of the Reform movement. The Free Synagogue remains a vital part of its living history, of its neighborhood, and of its city, and is intent on being a part of the neighborhood's future. Thank you for listening and learning about the synagogue's history. Please visit our website and take a virtual tour of our sanctuary. All right, bye-bye.